Okay, let us start the lecture. And we proved an important theorem called chain rule. We will see some applications of this today. One of them is called implicit differentiation. Sometimes the relation between two variables x and y is given explicitly as a function y as a function of x. So for example, y equal to x square and so on. But many a times it is described by a formula which is of the form fxy equal to 0, where f is a function of two variables. So it is some relation between x and y. For example, when you are given a function y equal to 1 over x, you can write implicitly as xy equal to 1. So you can represent x in terms of y or y in terms of x. So this is called a explicit representation, y equal to 1 over x, and this is called a implicit way of writing the function. But many a times when a relation is given, for example x5 plus y to the power 4 equal to 4, from here it may not be always possible to write y as a function of x or x as a function of y. So such relations we normally call as implicit representation of functions. So naturally a question arises, if you are given two variables x and y related by some equation or by a formula implicitly, then when can you determine dy by dx, rate of change of one with respect to the other? This question, to answer this question precisely, one has to know what is called implicit function theorem, which is a theorem about functions of two variables. So we'll do it when we come to functions of two variables. So this equation tells you when does a implicit equation fxy equal to 0 will represent y as a function of x, and when can you find dy by dx. So that we will do it later on. So presently we will just assume that whenever you are given an implicit relation, then that implicit relation does represent y as a function of x, and you can find dy by dx by using your chain rule. So for example, let us look at y square equal to x bigger than 0. So this you can write it as y square minus x is equal to 0. And from here, by assuming sort of y is a function of x and x is independent variable, you can differentiate this equation by chain rule, right? So when you differentiate, it is 2y dy by dx, right? 2y dy by dx is equal to 1. From this equation equal to 0, that is so equal to 1. And so dy by dx can be computed provided x is not equal to 0. But the question comes, if you are representing is 1 over 2y and you represent y in terms of x, then the problem comes, it is square root of plus minus x. So what does that mean? So which function, the derivative is of which function, right? In this case it's not difficult to analyze. We know that if you want to represent y as a function of x, it consists of two functions, y equal to square root x and y equal to plus square root 2x. That's why in dy by dx you get two derivatives, one with respect to each. But in general it may be a problem to find the dy by dx. But let us look at the function, say fxy equal to x square and so on, this equal to 0. So assuming you can write y as a function of x, implicit function theorem is applicable. You can apply chain rule and differentiate treating y as a function of x. So dy by dx will appear in this differentiation equal to 0. So solve for dy by dx. So compute from this equation dy by dx, simplify, and that comes out to be equal to this, provided whenever denominator is not equal to 0. But see, this dy by dx is written in terms of x and y. This is what is important thing to be noted. It may not be always possible to write dy by dx purely in terms of one variable x or y, because if you are able to represent x in terms of y, then what is implicit differentiation anyway, right? So your derivative may involve y and x both, but then you can ask what is the use of this kind of differentiation. But there is a use. For example, if you know you want to compute the derivative at a point, say 1, 1, so which satisfies the equation, then you can compute, you can use this formula. Because you know value of y, you know value of x, you can put the values and compute. So for example, at 1, 1 dy by dx, you can put the value x is equal to 1 and y equal to 1. So this is the advantage of implicit differentiation, right? You may not explicitly know the function, but still you are able to find dy by dx. Of course, you have to be assured that y is explicitly representable as a function of x. That has to be assured by implicit function theorem. So this is what is called implicit differentiation. So as a note, once again, you may not be able to write dy by dx explicitly as a function of x. It may not be possible always. There is another concept called successive differentiation, which you all know very well. So I'll just quickly go through it. So f is a function defined on an interval I to r, and let us take a point C in I and assume that in a neighborhood of that point C, the function is differentiable at all points in a neighborhood, not only at the point C, but the function is differentiable at all points in a neighborhood of C. That means f prime is a well-defined derivative function, is a well-defined function in a neighborhood of C. Then I can ask whether this function is again differentiable at the point C or not. So be careful. When you want to find derivative of a function, the function has to be defined in the neighborhood of that point. Otherwise you cannot find its derivative. So we are looking at derivative of the derivative function f prime. So first of all, f prime should be defined in the neighborhood of C, and then you can ask if it is differentiable. Then the derivative of the derivative function will be denoted by f double dash. So the only caution is that f prime should be defined in a neighborhood of C to be twice differentiable at the point C. So, and this is denoted by either f2 dash or d square f dx square notations, and you can define n times differentiability. If the n minus 1th derivative exists in a neighborhood of C and is differentiable, then the derivative of the n minus 1th derivative is called the nth derivative, n, denoted by f upper bracket n C. And if a function is differentiable for every n, then you say the function is infinitely differentiable any number of times. And all your trigonometric functions, polynomial functions, exponential function, they are all infinitely differentiable. Let us look at, so that is a polynomial function, you all know very well, it is differentiable and the derivative is given by for n less than or equal to k, bigger than it will be of course 0. Sin x, trigonometric function, nth derivative you can write in terms of sine again. So this is a formula for writing. If you don't want to write cos, derivative of sine in terms of cos, so you can write nth derivative be sine of x plus n pi by 2. So you can, that is. Let us look at the function fx is equal to x square sine 1 over x. And we want to know whether this function has second derivative or not at the point 0, and if it is so, what is the second derivative? The point to be observed here is this function has the first derivative, of course. Okay, let us compute the first derivative. If you compute, how will you compute the first derivative at points other than 0? This is the formula. So use your product rule to write the derivative at points other than 0. At 0, how will you compute the derivative? F of x minus f of 0 divided by x. So 1x will cancel with x square. So it will be x into sine 1 over x, and that x goes to 0 is 0. So derivative of this function at 0 is 0. So the first derivative function I can write down, if you differentiate this as product rule for x not equal to 0, so that is the derivative. At 0 the derivative is equal to 0. Quite often a mistake is made by students. They compute the derivative at points other than 0, and to compute the derivative at 0 they put the value equal to 0. In this, right, this, if you take this function x not equal to 0 and differentiate at point other than 0, this is the value. You cannot put x is equal to 0 and say that that is the derivative at 0. Because if that is the case, then what are you assuming? You are making an assumption that the first derivative exists at the point 0 and is continuous. The derivative function is continuous, if you are saying f prime x goes to 0 is f prime at 0, then you are making a very strong assumption that the first derivative is continuous, which may not be so. So that mistake should be avoided. You have to compute at the point 0 by definition. There is no other way out of computing derivative at the point 0. Okay? Okay. So this is the derivative function at the point 0. This is at not points which are not equal to 0. Now let us see whether this function is differentiable at the point second derivative exists at the point 0 or not. For this, if you want to look at the second derivative at the point 0, you have to look at how is the function defined. It is 2x sine 1 over x minus cos 1 over x. So this is going to be a problem, 1 over x. Actually this function is not even continuous at the point 0. So the first derivative function, it exists at all points but is not continuous at 0. So second derivative does not exist. Clear to everybody? So by saying that differentiable function has to be continuous, this function first derivative is not even continuous, so the second derivative does not exist. There is a formula which you all know, what is called Leibniz rule, for finding the nth derivative of product of two functions. If you are given two functions f and g, both are differentiable n times, then f into g n times nth derivative you can compute, right? That normally you prove it by induction. So since you have already done it, this kind of formula will not repeat it. So f into g, f and g are both differentiable in a neighborhood of the point n minus 1 times differentiable. F and g is differentiable and its nth derivative is given by, like binomial, is something similar to the binomial expansion, right? Instead of the power should be interpreted as the derivatives. Fn into g plus fn and so on. So kth will be nck, fn minus kc, gk and so on, right? So this is by, but these kind of formulas are useful sometimes. For example, if you want to compute the third derivative of x square sine x, of course is something simple, you can always do it, right? But if you are doing a programming and you want to program something, then it's good to have a formula and then put the values. So here you can compute first derivative, second derivative, third derivative of f and similarly of g and put the values in that formula, so you will get simplification. And so this is just straightforward application of Leibniz rule, successive differentiation. I hope all of you have done this kind of thing, right? Successive, so let us not spend too much time on this. Let us come to main applications of the derivative in determining what kind of functions we have. So we'll start with looking at what is called increasing and decreasing function. So our definition is obvious. The word increasing should indicate that as you move, right, on the x-axis from left to right, your function goes on increasing, it is rising. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So analytically, if x1 is less than x2, then f of x1 is less than or equal to x2. So be careful, I am writing increasing means f of x1 is less than or equal to x2. If this is strictly less, then we will say our function is strictly increasing. We will specify it. If you don't specify, then it is less than or equal to. If we say strictly increasing, then x1 less than x2 should imply f of x1 is strictly less than f of x2. And similarly decreasing, x1 less than x2 implies f of x1 is bigger than or equal to x2. The graph will be sloping down, it will be decreasing, okay, it will be falling down. And similarly I said strictly increasing or strictly decreasing if these inequalities are strict. So now once we have defined increasing, decreasing, now we can define the concept of what is called local maximum of a function at a point and local minimum of a function at a point. So we say C is a point in AB, but be careful, I am writing C in the open interval AB here. Okay, I am not looking at the endpoint, so I am looking at the point C which is in the open interval AB, and we are saying this is a point of local maximum if I can find a neighborhood of this point. So C minus delta to C plus delta, so that for all points in between the value at the point C is largest, right? Saying for all points x between C minus delta to C plus delta, f of x is less than or equal to f of c. So at this point, this is the value. So in some neighborhood, so there is a neighborhood here, you can say that if I look at the values here, right, at any point x, if I look at the value that is less than the value at the point c, right? So there's some neighborhood. It may be very, very small, it doesn't matter, but there is a neighborhood around which this happens. Similarly, you can define local minimum, right? So there is a neighborhood of the point such that for all points x between c minus delta to c plus delta, f of x is bigger than or equal to f of c. So once again, c is the point there. So there is a neighborhood c minus delta to c plus delta. If I look into this, so for any point x, if I look at the value, that value is bigger than the value at the point c. So that is local maximum and local minimum. So in our definition, if you are given a constant function, so we are once again keep in mind putting less than or equal to or bigger than or equal to. Okay. So in our definition, for a constant function, at every point there is a point of local maximum, at every point there is a local minimum in our definition. Clear? We should be clear what we are saying and what we are going to eventually. Okay. Now at the endpoints, if the C is an endpoint, left endpoint or right endpoint, then only one-sided neighborhoods are possible. You can only compare the value at the left endpoint A with the values on the right of A. Right? So when you say there is a neighborhood, so it will be only one-sided neighborhood for corresponding local maxima or local minima. So we'll say at the point A, there is a local maximum if there is a neighborhood. Okay. So this is A less than x less than A plus delta. So on the right side there is a neighborhood. So that for all points inside that interval, f of x is less than or equal to f of x. So endpoints, only one-sided neighborhood, whichever is possible. At A it will be only right-hand neighborhood, right-sided neighborhood. At B it will be only left-sided neighborhood for corresponding defining whether it's a local maximum or local. Similarly, local minimum at A and similarly at the endpoints B. So it's clear to everybody what is local maximum, local minimum, right? Locally, it is the boss, right? Local maximum, it's the greatest, right? The value at that point is the largest in a neighborhood or smallest in that neighborhood, okay? So just, I think computation, most of you are very familiar with these computations. So, for example, look at the function fx is equal to x square, okay? Then, in the interval say minus 1 to 1, at 0 the value is 0, which is always less than or equal to, right, x square, where for all x between the interval minus 1 to 1. So by definition, the function has a local minimum at the point 0, and the value of the local minimum is 0, right? The point of local minimum and what is the local minimum, okay, the value. So that is the graph. We know also parabola and so on. What about the endpoints? By our definition, these endpoints are points of local maximum, right? Because one-sided neighborhoods are possible where the value is the largest. Look at the function fx is equal to x cube in any interval a to b. If x is less than y, then we know x cube is less than or equal to y cube. So this is we know this is the graph of the function. So this has no local maximum or local minimum at any point, right? The function has no local maximum or local minimum. Let us look at this function. F of x is equal to 1 if x at the point 0, the value is 1. It is y equal to x between the open interval 0 to 1 and 0 at the point 1, right? So at the point 1, the value is 0. So what is the local maximum? What is the local minimum? Local maximum at 0 and local minimum at 1, right? So be careful what the function. Don't just look at y equal to x and give your answer. Look at how the function is defined, okay, and then decide. I think this is one of the basic theorems of this maxima, minima, increasing, decreasing. It is called necessary condition for local maximum and local minimum. So necessary means what? We will be given that the function has local maximum or local minimum at a point, and then we want to draw some conclusion about from that condition, right? Okay. So the theorem says if f is a function defined on an interval a b and c is an interior point, c inside the open interval a b, and has a local maximum or a local minimum at c, okay, and is differentiable, then f prime of c must be equal to 0. Geometrically, it's a very obvious statement, right? Because if at a point c there's a local maximum, say local maximum, then the value here it is largest, right? Here the value is the largest in a neighborhood, okay, and it is differentiable. Value is largest, so the only possibility is the function looks like this in a neighborhood, right? Intuitively, it may not be exactly like this. It may be going like curving and then, but the values always stay below that value, and the function is differentiable at the point c. Okay, that is given to at the point c. There is no sharp edge. Okay, it is smooth at the point c. Then the theorem says then the tangent at that point must be horizontal. That is the geometric implication of this theorem, right? It's very clear. So let us prove this. Proof is quite simple. Suppose let us say the function has a local maximum at the point ab, at the point c inside the interval ab. So what does local maximum mean? In a neighborhood, the value at c is bigger than or equal to value at every point in that neighborhood. So let us write a neighborhood. So there exists a neighborhood, say there is a delta, say f of x is less than or equal to f of c for all points x between c minus delta and c plus delta. So that is the implication of a function having local maximum. And what we want to do? We want to make some conclusion about the derivative. And what is derivative? F of x minus f of c divided by x minus c. So let us compute that quantity. So let us write what is f of, so f of say c plus h minus f of c divided by h. Limit of that we have to compute, right? Now if you look at h positive, that means you are going on the right side of the point c. Whether you are on the right side or left side, the value at that point is less than or equal to f of c. So if h is positive, what is the numerator? If h is positive, what is the numerator? That is negative or positive. So I have written it wrong, I think here, right? Oh, it is 0 minus. I will. Okay, right. I am discussing about 0 plus. I am writing 1. So let us look at 0 minus. H is negative. Numerator is positive. Denominator negative. So this quotient is always positive. So what happens to this limit? Limit of a function, if f of x is always bigger than or equal to 0, the limit also will be bigger than or equal to 0. That we have proved. So f prime of c is bigger than or equal to 0. Because we are also using the fact that because the function is differentiable, the left hand derivative is equal to the actual derivative. We are using that fact also here. So we are using two things. Because the function is differentiable, left hand derivative is equal to the derivative, and for a function, if our values are bigger than or equal to 0, then the limit also is bigger than or equal to 0. The two things put together give me this is bigger than or equal to 0. Now it should be clear that we should look also at the left hand. This is the left hand, so right hand derivative. If we look at 0 plus, then this is f of this is negative and this is positive, so this is negative, so it will be less than or equal to 0. So the proof is quite simple, straightforward, saying that local maximum minima allows you to compare the values of the function in a neighborhood of the point with the values at that point. F of x minus f of c, or f of c plus h minus. So you know the sign of that, right? Depending on whether h is positive or negative, you will get left hand derivative is bigger than or equal to 0, right hand less than or equal to 0. And because derivative exists, so these two must be equal, and the only possibility is derivative must be equal to 0. So that is an important thing. So why is this similar proof for local minimum? Why is this theorem important? It gives you a necessary condition that if there is a local maximum minima, then the derivative at that point must be 0 if the function is differentiable at that point. Now, if you are given a function and asked to find points of local maxima minima, then what are the points you should look for? Because this says if at a point there is going to be local maxima minima and the function is differentiable, then derivative must be equal to 0. Of course, the point must be interior point, right? So at least it gives you a possibility where to look for points of local maxima minima. Look at the points which are interior points and look at the points where the derivative exists and is equal to 0. Those are possibly the points where the function can have local maxima and minima, right? So this is how the importance of this theorem is, right? It narrows down your search for points of local maxima and minima. So let us remark, this is only a necessary condition for a function to have local maxima and minima. It is not sufficient. That means what? A function can have local maxima minima without even being differentiable, right? We looked at that function y equal to x in the open interval. At the point 0 the value was, right, given to be 1. At the point 1 the value was given to be 0. It had local maxima minima. The function is not differentiable. You can have, for example, and these are not sufficient. For example, and the converse need not hold. So y equal to x cube is one such example. I gave you another one. Okay. At this point, derivative is 0, but this is not a point of local maxima or minima, right? So once again, it holds only for interior points. That is very important because we are going to look at left hand, right hand limits of the derivative, right, in the proof. So it works only for points which are interior points. Okay. So if an endpoint, one function can have a local maximum minima without the derivative, because at the endpoint, for example, the derivative will be only one-sided derivative, right? For example, that function, if you look at the right hand derivative exists at this point the left hand derivative exists, and both are not equal to 0. But those are the points of local maxima and local minima, right? So be careful when you are applying. It is only for interior points, not the end points. Okay. So that we have already said without being even, you can have many examples. So this is another example you can have. So let us not bother much about this example. The function need not be. As a consequence of this, we get a very important theorem, which is again geometrically very obvious, called Rolle's theorem, which all of you, I think, know it very well. So let us quickly go through it. It says f is a function defined in a closed bounded interval AB. Okay. It is continuous in the interval AB, closed bounded interval AB, and the endpoints, the values are equal. In the open interval, the function is differentiable. Then the consequence is that there is a point where the derivative must be equal to 0. Right? It's quite obvious, actually, geometrically it's quite obvious, so probably let me just draw the picture. So here is, so this is the point A, this is the point B. At the point A the value is f of A, at the point B the value is f of B. So this is the point A, this is the point B, and this is the value at the, right? If from here to here you have to go in a continuous fashion, right? Either you can go straight, it's a constant function, then the derivative at every point, there is no rate of change, derivative will be 0, or either you will go up or you will start going down. Whichever way, if you start going up, then somewhere you have to turn back to come to the point. So when you turn, those turning point will be a point where there will be a point of local maximum. Or if you are going down and then if you are turning up, then there will be a point where there will be a point of local minimum. And just now we proved that at an interior point, if there is a local maximum or a local minimum, the derivative must be equal to 0. So the proof is over, right? So that is the proof of this Rolle's theorem. So shall we write that proof? So this is how one thinks of a proof, and then you write the proof. Okay. So how will you write the proof? So first of all, you want that the function given to be a continuous function, right, in the closed bounded interval, and the points where the derivative is going to be 0 are the points where the function is going to have a local maximum or local minimum, right? So I have to ensure that the function has local maximum and local minimum. right? Otherwise I cannot proceed, because I have to say that if you are going continuously, then somewhere you have to turn. Either you go straight, then every point is a point of local maximum or local minimum. If you are going up, then somewhere you have to start turning down, so there will be a point where you have local maximum, right? And you are given the function to be continuous. So what property of continuous functions implies that the function will have a local maximum or local minimum, right? You have to justify that claim first of all. So how will you justify? F is given to be continuous on a closed bounded interval AB. I want to justify that there is at least one point where local maximum occurs. So does any theorem comes to your mind which will justify this? F is continuous on a closed bounded interval. So at least one theorem, properties of continuous functions. None of you seem to remember that. I said it is very important. A continuous function on a closed bounded interval is a bounded function and attains its maximum and minimum, right? We stated that property. So use that property of continuous functions to justify that in a closed bounded interval AB, as is the case here, there are 2 points C1 and C2. Say that at f of C1 the function is largest value, f of C2 the value is smallest, right? For all points compared to the interval AB, right? In fact, what one says is these are absolute maximum and absolute minimum for the function. Compared to any point, the value at any point in the interval AB, the value at that point f of C1 is the largest. F of C1 is bigger than or equal to f of x for all x in AB, and similarly f of C2 is less than or equal to, right? So let us first use that property. So f is continuous on AB, so there are points C1 and C2. Say that f of C1 is the maximum value and f of C2 is the minimum value of the function in that interval, right? So we are sure that now look, see, if a point is a absolute maximum, that means it is the largest value compared to all points, then it is also local anyway. So this is the fact one should observe, that if at a point the value is largest compared to all values at all points in the interval AB, then of course in a neighborhood also that property is true, right? So at the point C1 there is also a local, is also a point of local, actually it is a global, one would say, right? And this is the point of f of C2 is a local minimum, actually a global. Now what are the possibilities? At least let us say one of them, C1 and C2, right, are interior points. That is a possibility. F of C1, one case is this C1, C2 belong to the closed bounded interval AB, right? So what are the possibilities? Both, at least one of the C1 or C2 is inside open interval AB. In that case, that point C1 or C2 is a point of local maximum, and by the previous theorem, as we said, that is a turning point, derivative must be equal to 0, right? If not, what is the other possibility? None of C1 and C2 is interior point. That means what? C1 and C2 have to be endpoints. But C1, at C1 the value is maximum, at C2 the value is minimum, and at endpoints the values are equal. That is the second condition given to us. F of A is equal to f of B. So what does that mean? That means the function must be a constant function, and hence derivative at all interior points is equal to 0. So the proof is over. So the main crux is to ensure that there is a turning point somewhere. That is by continuity on the closed bounded interval. Now only possibility the C1 and C2 are one of them at least an interior point. In that case it will be 0 by the previous theorem, because the function is given to be differentiable in the open interval and C1 or C2 is an interior point. Hence previous theorem is applicable. If not, they are endpoints, and in that case it is a constant function and it is equal to 0. So that's how you think and write the proof. Each step you justify by known fact. So that proves that f prime of C must be equal to 0 at some point. Let us forget about visualizations at present. So let us look at some illustrations of this theorem. Fx is equal to x square minus 2x. So once you at the point 0, I'm just verifying that conditions of Rolle's theorem are satisfied. So at 0 the value is 0, at 2 4 minus 4 that is equal to 0, and it is differentiable actually everywhere, not only in the open interval. So there must be a point where we can find that point here because we know the function precisely. See, importance of Rolle's theorem is not that you can locate the point. It says that there exists a point. There are many theorems in mathematics which show only existence of something. Something happens. But where that phenomena happens, you may not be able to locate always. Right? That is a different story altogether. So Rolle's theorem only says that there is a point where the derivative will be equal to where it is. Okay? Sometimes it may be easy to find, sometimes it may not be possible. So in this, because we know the function, we can find the derivative and find points. Okay? Similarly, another example. So I think, okay, at the endpoints you verify conditions are true, right? You find the derivative now and put it equal to 0 to find that point C. You get point 0 plus minus 1, but only one point is valid because for Rolle's theorem C must be a interior point, right? So only C equal to 0 is. These remarks, I think you have gone through this quite often, that all the conditions in the Rolle's theorem, that continuity in the closed bounded interval AB, differentiability in the open interval AB, and the values are equal at the endpoints, none of these conditions can be dropped to get conclusion of Rolle's theorem. So, examples. For example, continuity. So let us look at the function fx is equal to x in 0, including 0, open 1, at the 1, the value is 0. So for this function, it is defined in the interval 0 to 1. What is the value at 0? 0. At 1, we have put the value to be 0. Values at the endpoints are equal, right? Of course, the function is differentiable in the open interval 0 to 1, but you can see derivative at no point is 0, right? Because the function is not continuous. So, right, it does not contradict Rolle's theorem because, okay, so I think, let me not go too fast because there was a remark in Moodle saying that I am clicking too fast, right? So if at any point you feel I am going too fast, I normally go fast only over which I think you already have gone through, because if I go on repeating something which you know very well, then most of you may start sleeping probably. I can see some of you are already sleeping anyway, right? Because either it is a 8:30 class. You see, the important thing is, if you sleep over something, then it is your loss, okay, not mine anyway. So, condition of continuity cannot be dropped from Rolle's theorem, okay. Similarly, other examples, let us look at the condition fx is equal to mod x, okay, in the interval minus 1 to 1, endpoints the values are equal, this is a continuous function, right, but still there is no point where the derivative is equal to 0 because obviously it is not differentiable in the open interval AB, minus 1 to 1. You can construct many such examples yourself. For example, look at the function fx is equal to x in 0 to 1, okay. Look at the function fx is equal to x, it is continuous, differentiable in the open interval 0 to 1, but at no point the derivative is 0. So the third condition, f of a equal to f of b, that is not satisfied, so nothing wrong with this, okay. So let us, so the conditions in Rolle's theorem, the three conditions, continuity in the closed bounded interval, differentiability in the open interval, and values are equal at the endpoints, all three are required for the conclusion, none of them can be dropped. Let me give you some applications of this. For example, this one application of this theorem is that you can use it to locate zeros of polynomials. You see, in algebra it's a big problem. If you are given a quadratic, you know how to solve it. If you are given a cubic, you still have some ways of solving it. If you have biquadratic, difficulties increase, but still you can manage to solve. But if it is 5 or above, polynomial of degree 5 or above, there is no known method of solving a polynomial of degree bigger than or equal to 5. There is no algorithm known for finding roots of such polynomials. So when you cannot find exactly roots, right, at least you will like to say that there is a root in some interval at least. You will try to locate some interval on the line where you will like to say that there is a root possibly between 1 and 2, between 2 and 3. Right? Once you cannot find something, at least try to approximate, right? Natural thing. So this theorem helps you to do that. For example, let us look at, just to illustrate, let us look at the polynomial of degree 4, x to the power 4 plus 2x cube minus 2 in the interval 0 to 1. Okay? And I want to know whether this polynomial has any root inside this interval or not. If yes, possibly how many we want to find out. So let us look at the value at 0. The value at 0 is minus 2. The value at 1 you can compute and you can find the value at 1 is positive. So at 0 the value is minus 2. The value at 1 is 1, which is positive. So at the left hand point 0, the value is negative. The right hand point the value is positive and is a polynomial. So this is a continuous function. Property of continuous function says, intermediate value property says that if the function takes any two values, then it takes every value in between. So this is a continuous function which takes a negative value and a positive value and in between these values. So there must be a point in the interval 0 to 1 where this polynomial must be equal to 0. So there is at least one root in 0 to 1. Intermediate value property. You see how continuity to say that there is a root in between. That is what normally done. Given a polynomial, you try to take some possible intervals, right? In 0, 1, now you can shrink. 0 to 1, you can take 0.5 and 1. Try to shrink if you want to have better approximation. In 0 and 1, there is a root. Now we would like to know, is a polynomial, does it have more than one root in that interval 0 to 1? Or does the graph cut the x once or more than once geometrically? Or does this polynomial have a root than 1, right? More than one root in the interval to 1. So suppose it has. Till now we are not Rolle's theorem at all, Rolle's theorem at all. I don't know whether one should pronounce it or Rolle's theorem. It is a French name, so it doesn't matter for how we pronounce it that well, right? Only spelling should be written properly. Because French won't pronounce my name properly. So about pronouncing their names properly. So let us assume that this function has got two roots. That means, of course, in 0 to 1. If it has two different roots, that means what? There are points A and point B. So f of A is equal to f of B is equal to 0. And in the interval A to B, the function is continuous and differentiable. So Rolle's theorem is applicable. So there must be a point in between, right, A and B, where the derivative must be equal to 0, right? But let us look at the derivative of this function. So there are points I have C1, C2. So what is the derivative of this function? 4x cubed plus 6x square, which is never 0 in the interval 0 to 1. So that means what? That means our assumption, there are two different roots at least. Wrong. That means this polynomial has got only one root in the interval 0 to 1. So this is an application of this theorem. Okay. So it has a unique root. There is another form of Rolle's theorem, which is called Lagrange's mean value theorem. It is same as Rolle's theorem basically, but with a slight, you have to view it with a slightly different angle. So let me say first what is the theorem. It says, suppose you are given, conditions are same. F is a function given in the closed bounded interval AB. Derivative exists in the open interval. It is continuous there. The condition that f of A equal to f of B is dropped. Right? Then the conclusion is that there is a point C. Earlier we said there is a point C where derivative is equal to 0. Now we can say there is a point C. Say that FB minus f of A is equal to f prime C into B minus A. Okay, that is the conclusion of why it is same as Rolle's theorem or Rolle's theorem, because of this. I can't tilt no, if I tilt it, it doesn't tilt there. See, sort of imagine this. Okay, this is the point A, this is the value at the point A, this is the value at the point B. Okay, imagine the x is like this. Then it is Rolle's theorem, right? Precisely, that's what I said, it is Rolle's theorem. Only you have to tilt yourself a bit to see that it is Rolle's theorem. But at present you don't know what is called rotations and such things, so let me not go into that idea, but you can see at least it is same. So basic idea is to prove this theorem, somehow it looks like Rolle's theorem, we should be able to apply Rolle's theorem to some suitable function. Idea is to apply Rolle's theorem to a suitable function on the interval AB. So I want to define a function on the interval AB such that it is continuous on the interval, closed interval AB. It is on the open interval it is differentiable, and there is a point where the derivative will be equal to 0 by Rolle's theorem. But that derivative must give me, what it should give me? Fb minus f of a divided by b minus a, because that is what we want for the function. Right? So derivative equal to 0 should be same as saying that fb minus f of a divided by b minus a is equal to f prime of c. But what is fb minus f of a divided by b minus a? That is slope of the secant, and so that is the slope of this. You want it to be equal to slope at some point. So you should look at the function which is nothing but you look at the function which is the difference of these two graphs. One is the secant line joining the points where the value is f of a with f of b, and this is the function. So look at the value, this height. Okay, geometrically let us look what will be the value of this height at the point A. What is the difference? Difference is 0. At this point the difference is 0, right? And what is the derivative difference? That will be same as slope of this is equal to derivative, that is slope of that, right? So that is how I guess what should be the function to which I should apply Rolle's theorem. So I want to define the function which is nothing but the difference of fx minus the line joining these 2 points. So we know the equation of that line. So let us write down the value of that function. So here, so I want a function on say that h of a equal to h of b. The difference will have that property, and the derivative, right, will be, okay, that should be equal to this, because that I want equal to 0. That will give me f prime at c is equal to the required thing. So that difference gives me the, so let us write that formula for that fx minus lx. The equation of lx is the line joining afa and af of b. Once you write that, the formula is, so this is the equation of the line joining the point. Okay, so fx minus lx, that's all. Geometrically we have seen the idea. So now just verify the conditions of Rolle's theorem are true, and hence derivative must be equal to 0 at some point. H prime of c is f prime of c, right, and the derivative is equal to that. So that is the proof of, and it is just a generalization of right, because if f of a is equal to f of b, that gives you f prime. So you can see it is a generalization of that mean value theorem. Right, so let me just give you quickly some applications of this mean value theorem, some small applications. One is the physical application of this interpretation of this theorem. Let's assume that the function indicates the distance traveled by a body. Is traveling, right, at time a to time b, f of t gives you the distance traveled. So what will be the average, right? What will be the speed, average speed of this body? Distance traveled, total distance traveled by total time taken. So fb minus f of a divided by b minus a. So that is the average speed of this body, right? And what does Rolle's theorem say, or mean value theorem say? That the average speed must be equal to f prime at some point c. And what does f prime indicate? That is the velocity at a point at time t equal to c. If we have gone, right, the average speed, if you have gone from 0 to 100, right, accelerated 0 to 100, the average speed, say it is 10, then at some time point your actual speed should have been 10. That is the physical application of this. So the average must be equal to f prime. Okay. Other application which is very important, which we use it left and right, if the derivative is equal to 0 in an open interval, then the function must be a constant function, right? That comes as a consequence of mean value theorem. Because what does mean value theorem say? fb minus f of a divided by a minus b is equal to f prime at some point in the open interval. So if the derivative is 0 in the open interval at every point, then fb is equal to f of a, wherever a and b are there in the domain. So take any 2 points a and b in the domain, apply mean value theorem in the interval a to b, right? Then it gives you fb minus f of a divided by b minus a must be equal to derivative at some point, but that is 0. So fb is equal to f of a for any 2 points a and b. So that gives you that the function must be a. So any 2 points a1, b1 you can apply, that is a constant. And another variation of this, if 2 functions are such that the derivatives are equal, then the functions differ by a constant, right? That obviously you can apply above thing for f minus g, and f minus g will have derivative equal to 0. This is another theorem which is sometimes useful. Supposing f is continuous on AB and differentiable conditions of mean value theorem are satisfied, then we know this, and suppose the derivative function is bounded. Suppose the derivative function is bounded by m and capital M, then I can give a bound for the function. So what are the bounds for the function? fb minus f of a will be between m times b minus a and capital M times b minus a. That obvious? Because I can divide by fb minus f of a divided by b minus a, that is equal to derivative at some point by mean value theorem, which lies between small m and capital M. So direct application of mean value theorem, that if the derivative is bounded by some, right, then you have this, that the function, variation in the function is at the most m times b minus a and capital M b minus a. I think this is the final and small application which will tell you that these things are not just for the sake of doing it, they are useful in computations. Let us look at the function fx is equal to square root x in some interval n to n plus 1. The function is continuous, differentiable, so mean value theorem applicable. So that gives me that there is a point C, say that f of n plus 1 minus f of n will be equal to f prime c at some point in between, and I put the value of f n plus 1. So they give me square root of n plus 1 minus square root n is less than 1 over 2 square root c for some point c in between. But where is the point c? That is between n and n plus 1. If c is bigger than n, then 1 over square root c will be less than 1 over square root n, right? So I have a bound for this also. So I can use that and write 1 over 2 square root n plus 1 is less than square root n plus 1 minus this, less than the value at the other endpoint for c. So I get an estimate for square roots. I can use it. For example, let us use it for n equal to 1. What does that give me? This is true for every n equal to 1, right? 1 plus 1, that is square root 2, is less than, take this on the other side, square root n plus n equal to 1, so that is 1.5. So you get a bound for square root 2, right? Similarly, you can use it for square root 3, for square root 3, square root 5, and so on. For n equal to 3, if I use it, right, then I get it is less than 1.75 using the same thing. Sometimes I'll use this inequality, sometimes use the other one equality. Square root of 5, using once again the other one, is less than 2.25. So at least it gives you bounds how far away this can be, right? Probably one can take it approximate value also. So let us stop here, just saying that we have proved